detector. It
And
sounds like
that's why you should never have an orangutan clean your house.
No, you shouldn't, because one, they overcharge. You know, they always have, you know. Never mind.
I've never been overcharged by an orangutan. Hello, people. Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes here with Chuck Manley, Scott Moon, and Ralph Kern. It is season 3, episode 31, and we're talking about epic beginnings today. We've got a couple weeks in a row here where it's just us talking about things that we want to talk about, and we figured that while we're doing that, we might want to include some topics of substance that might actually help our viewers and listeners instead of just listening to us ramble. Hopefully the connection is fine tonight. I haven't seen anybody complaining yet. I'm not sure what happened last week with the connection. The internet did not like us last week. Hopefully we don't have those problems this week. Welcome into the live chat if you're here. Glad you're here to hang out with us on this Monday night. And let's jump right into it. I had this idea to talk about the epic beginnings because I've read I've started a couple books this week that I got into the first chapter and it just didn't feel right to me. I didn't like it.
Maybe,
what did
Josh,
you do then?
sorry to interrupt, but before we dive into our favorites, maybe we should talk about what a good opening should accomplish.
Give the basics.
Yeah, we can do that. For me, I want to read the opening and get just pulled straight into the book, just pulled right in. And I want it to catch my attention. A couple of books do that very well. We're going to talk about these here in a little while. I've got a couple of favorites. I think the other guys have a couple of favorites themselves. That's my opinion of a good opening. Just really kind of grabbing my attention and being, hey, this is interesting. I want to read the rest of this. Does you guys have kind of a different opinion, or what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think the most important thing about the first paragraph, the opening of a book, is that you want it to immediately evoke questions in the reader. You know, you want them to say, hey, what is this? Who is this? Why are they doing what they're doing? And that is getting the answers to those questions.
How much does an orangutan charge to clean your house?
Exactly. That's what's going to propel them forward through the book. If you just kind of start out with somebody just, doing boring shit and being a boring person, nobody's going to want to read any further because they've got nothing they're trying to discover. So I think it's really best to try and just get those questions in the reader's head to make them curious enough to continue with the story.
Part of drawing you in. There are some genres that start out with kind of a day in the life thing, and I'm not a huge fan. And I read a couple of those recently for other authors, and I started to realize that I was reading in the wrong genre for my interests. But they really did go about, and they talked about, like, one, for example, was it was a survivalist, because it was a dystopian novel, kind of into the world survival thing, and I thought this is going to be great for me, but there was an inordinate amount of detail put into what this character had when it happened. Like, I had my shirt and 2 balls of twine and a toothbrush and 1 can of green beans, and it went on about that stuff, and the whole book's like that. But I realized that the end prepper kind of genre that's something that is part of the genre. So
that's like hard science fiction for survivalists.
Yeah,
they're wanting to make sure the details make sense and that it's logical, and that that's what I do in that situation.
And that almost kicked me out, because a lot of that was in the beginning, and it was really hard. And I think I read about half the book, and I finally said I have some other stuff I need to read right now. But it was recommended. I read that book because it was recommended. So Josh says you need a book that you need an opening that draws you right in. And Chuck asking the questions, setting the questions, what's at stake, what's going on. I agree with all that. So
Blake in the live chat asks about what about epic fantasy? It seems like those sorts of books are a little slower in the beginning. One of the examples I have tonight is epic fantasy. It's Game of Thrones. I don't know if we want to start right off with that one, or if we want to move on to another one. I guess we could start out with that one. We don't have anything else on the table right now.
One more point on openings, though, is that they're very much genre dependent too. Epic fantasy has a slower pace overall. So the questions that are introduced at the beginning are going to be drawn out over a longer period. You write a hardcore like James Bond spy thriller kind of thing, you want that shit happening right up front, real fast, because that's what the readers expect.
They did it in the wrong genre, but that'll be wrong.
Yeah, epic fantasy is essentially the same thing. It just takes a few more pages than the other genres.
And perhaps a little bit later we can sort of like delve into the old prologue, non-prologue question, because you know, some people really like.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So, but okay, let's sort of
take it away, Joshua Hayes.
Okay, so Game of Thrones, one of my favorite epic fantasy novels of all time. One of the longest and one of the most popular and unfinished series of the
I don't care if he ever finishes. I still just love it. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah,
maybe they'll hire you to finish it after he dies, Josh.
Okay, don't start with that nonsense. I'm just gonna read the first line. I'm not gonna read the entire prologue because but I'll read the first line and then I'll talk a little bit about the prologue and why I liked it so much. So the first line of Game of Thrones is, "We should start back," Garrett urged as the woods began to grow dark around them. "The wildlings are dead." So
boom. Sorry,
right,
go ahead.
Boom.
Yeah,
that's good because you have a character that is obviously nervous about what's going on. The woods growing dark is a very moody, very atmospheric change that you have. It's a visual that you see. It also denotes danger and mystery. And then the wildlings are dead. Well, what are the wildlings? I don't know.
What the fuck's a wildling? Why are these guys driving through these crazy, dark, scary woods? Who are they to begin with? And
why are they dead? Right. So it just, that one line just opens up so much about the what you're about to get into. You have to read on, and the prologue, it's about what, 20 pages maybe, and after you read that prologue, which is 20 pages, it's probably 5,000 words on a prologue, and you're like, holy crap, 5,000 words. But a Game of Thrones is like 250,000 words. So he's got a lot of space to play with here. But even in that huge, it's not huge, even in a big prologue, it sets the pace for the story. But at the end of that prologue, so much happens that you just have to read the rest of it. I mean, you're like, what is this undead dude that just killed this guy with an ice sword? Like, holy crap, right? Like, and the great thing I think about the prologue in here is it doesn't give you any real context about the world. There's no long history or backstory of the world. Like, it doesn't.
It's happening in immediate time.
Right.
Exactly. And the one thing I like about A Song of Ice and Fire is that all of that stuff is seeded as you read the book. Yeah. And so you learn so much about the world and so much about the characters and their backstory and what happens 200, 300, 400 years, 1,000 years before what goes on in the present day. But he seeds it so much throughout the book that you don't ever feel like you're getting backstory or like just a writer's dump. But that prologue, unlike a lot of prologues where they say start with a bang, I mean, it doesn't exactly start with a bang. It kind of builds up to it. It's not like an abrupt start, like say The Martian, which is a book we're going to talk about here in a little bit. It's a slow build. And I think epic fantasy is the space to do that. And right real quick before I finish my thought, Blake Peel mentions The Way of Kings in here, and that his sentence is Seth Zunzun Volano, truthless of Shinovar, wore white on the day he was to wear the kill a king. That is the beginning of The Way of Kings, which is great. Not technically the beginning of the book, because the beginning of the book starts like 10,000 years before, but still great first line. Yep. Great first line. And now I'll give it up to you guys because I'm hogging the mic. I feel like because I get excited about this stuff.
Oh yeah. Do you want to? I mean, we each had like 3. Did you want to do your other ones, or did we just want to talk about yours? How are we doing?
I'd like to say something real quick about the Game of Thrones there, and then I'll pass it off to either one, and then we can come back around. But the one thing I wanted to add to what Josh said is that that sentence, and just the first sentence, it does all those things that you said. It asks a question. It puts people in peril. It sets a concrete time and place. You know, if you're looking for the most basic concepts, set a question, make something at stake, put people in danger, set it in a the action is currently occurring in a concrete place that you can see, all done in one short sentence.
Yep.
So absolutely, that one definitely gets my vote.
In the vast majority of opening lines for professional authors, you'll find that the opening line, certainly the opening paragraph, probably some of the most densest writing you'll find. You get a hell of a lot communicated to you in a very short space of time, and that'll be one of the examples that I'm going to bring forth shortly, where you'll see that. But yeah, Game of Thrones, there's a massive amount of world building that goes in there, and a massive amount of personal stakes as well, and that's probably one of the most best examples of an opening line you can get. It's from in a kind of big expansive world that he has to build and create. For the Game of Thrones, my opinion, my humble opinion.
Well, and I think too, a lot of authors get kind of concerned about, I have so much world building that I want to share. If I don't dump it all at the beginning of my book, or if I don't show the reader that my world is so freaking cool, they're not going to read the rest of my book. And so they spend pages or paragraphs just kind of going into the history of their big space empire, or the history of their fantastic orc and elvish wars or something, and they just go on and on about that, because they feel like this is great world building and great information, and just impacts the story, and people have to know this, but they don't have to know it to start reading the book.
The problem, I think one of the reasons a lot of writers have done that is, and you're absolutely right, I agree 150%. But the reason a lot of people do that is because there's so much fantasy that traditionally that way. If you go back and read older fantasy, that's how it starts, and they do a lot of that. And so I think a lot of the bad habits we have come from that's the genre is full of that. I think it's slowly changing. Hopefully.
No, I think you're right about that, because I remember reading like Michael Moorcock's Chronicles of Corum and Bane of the Black Sword and all that stuff back in the day. Even some of the Fawford and the Grey Mouser stuff, and he was.
You go back and reread that stuff now, and you're like, "What?"
It takes forever. No, I agree with that, but I think that the current trend towards
better writing,
towards the quicker, the quicker, punchier openings that really pull people in fast. I think it's better writing. It's better storytelling at the least. Maybe from a craft perspective, as far as wordsmithing and choosing your language and that sort of thing. Maybe those guys were a little more prolific, but as far as engaging storytelling, I think the more modern methods are probably better.
I agree.
And it probably doesn't, I don't know whether you want to move on, but it seems like quite a good segue to me would be like taking it to the other extreme with The Martian and the opening for The Martian. So like having just done Game of Thrones, shall I bring that one forth, or do you want to sort of like?
No, let's talk about it. Do you have it pulled up, or do you want me to read it?
I've got it. So The Martian, probably one of the most successful self-published, and then it's become regular published. Opening section, log entry, Sol 6. I'm pretty much fucked. That's my considered opinion. Fucked. 6 days into what should be the greatest 2 months of my life, it's turned into a nightmare. That's the three opening lines.
It's hard to put down.
I mean, I mean, how do you put down, after reading those lines, how do you put that book down?
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't.
So we know that somehow he's in dire straits, or sorry, he or she, we don't even know that at that point. I'm pretty much fucked. So something's going on, and he's screwed, or she's screwed. That's my considered opinion. Already we're getting sort of like a little bit of a sense of our our protagonist or narrator's kind of dry sense of humor.
Yep.
And yeah, that continues it. And then 6 days into what should have been then we started to get the world building. Obviously, we haven't got the complete context now, but we've started to understand where he's gone from. Whatever's happened in the 2 months that has happened previous to this moment is supposed to be the best 2 months of this guy's or girl's life. And then 6 days in, it's turned into a nightmare. I mean, to me, that's is just being absolutely slapped across the face with an opening. There's no messing around. We've got a sense of our protagonist. Like he's got a bit of a sense of humour to him. We've got like a little bit of a sense about what he was supposed to be doing, which is having a really good time, or having or in this character's case, the pinnacle of his career, and something's happened, which means he's fucked. So, how dense is the amount of information you get in there? It's incredible.
And you're absolutely right. Like when I first read The Martian, and I read it, I read it on Audible. I read it on audiobook. So R.C. Bray read it to me, which is, and I'll just say that the audio version of this book, everybody talks shit on audiobooks for some reason. We got,
what?
Well, not everybody, but we had a lot of people when we put out our first episode of the Watchers podcast on Wheels of Time. We had a lot of people that were like, "Oh, they're listening to the books. They don't have time to actually read them." And I'm like, "Listen here, snob.
That's popish bullshit, man."
Yeah. So I listened to R.C. Bray read me The Martian, and at that first I'm pretty much fucked deal, like just it sold me. I'm like, yes, this is the type of book that I want to read. And then I got to like the 8 pages of potatoes, and I was like, oh my God, please stop talking about potatoes. For the love of shit. I don't give a fuck about your potatoes anymore. But no, you're right, Ralph. It sets the tone for the whole book, because you read those first couple of lines and you're like, this is the type of book that it doesn't matter that he's on Mars. It doesn't matter that it's set in the future or the present or wherever. You're reading this book now because of the narrator, because of the person that's telling the story.
Now, if I can throw something in there on that particular book, I think that a lot of times openings in first person, a lot of the hook is going to be that character's individual voice.
Right.
Because that was one of the things for me because I listened to the audio also. And one of the engaging things was the fact that, like, okay, this guy is obviously doing something like crazy smart or whatever, but he also comes across as very like, yeah, I'd have a beer with this guy at the sports bar kind of, and I think a lot of times when you're writing in first person, if you really nail that approachable and kind of understandable voice from your main character, that's going to do a lot to pull the reader in and get them through the book.
Yeah.
Well, especially something like The Martian, which is arguably a bit of a different kind of book. So certainly when I first read it, I read it in one of its first not the first iteration, but one of the first iterations, where it was pretty much just Mark Watney, and you kind of, you've got this poor guy alone, and he hasn't got anyone to engage with other than the reader. Everything's pretty much logs and and him telling his story for who might come later. The story itself evolved into more of a complete kind of story. But,
that's awesome beginning, awesome story. We can come back to it. Do you want to go on to the next one? I know that we have a couple of questions in the chat. I see somebody wants to handle those, and it looks like people are getting a lot out of this. So, this is a great thing to talk about.
And the thing about The Martian too, like you said, is there was a couple iterations, and The Martian started out on a website with parts, and it didn't get popular until he put it on Amazon, and they got super popular on the audio version.
Right.
And what I'd like to mention too is that there's a lot of reviews out there on indie books where people are like, I didn't like it because there was cursing in it. And I'm like, are you kidding me now? Like, that cursing is basically a part of life for every adult
Well,
anywhere.
no, I'm gonna have to call you on that, because I know a lot of people that's around, like in the real world, that still is just like a foreign thing to them. I mean, there's still a lot of really sheltered people out there. But here's the
I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
Here's a really funny thing, though, because I've spent most of my working life in either electronics or healthcare. So I've worked with like engineers and heart surgeons and trauma surgeons and all this super educated, very intelligent people.
Who's got the dirtiest mouth?
Who cuss like that's just like there's no other way to speak. You know, so when people come to me and go, well, that's just a sign of a stupid person, I'm like, you're not paying attention.
Yeah, unless you've been to 15 years of medical school.
Right.
They beat the swearing out of you by the time you're done.
So to those people, I just say, go read a cozy mystery or a sweet romance and have a nice life.
And I say that not to call those other.
We can all say that as like cops, you know, we're especially the kind of people who would, you know,
cops
when
and
someone
nurses
swears,
are the worst.
Yeah, when someone swears in the street, we're especially the people.
Given the Hayes home's got both in it, there.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
Why?
It's like the romanticized professions, you know. Because think about it, all the shows on TV. There, you've got the cop shows and you've got the medical shows.
Yeah.
And those of you that work in law enforcement know that the cop shows are bullshit, and those of us that work in healthcare know that the healthcare shows are bullshit, and that there's a lot more blue language going on than what these people are talking about.
It's right. I'll throw one last thing. I'm going to demand everybody return to the topic.
Because you're not drinking.
Because I'm not drinking, because I have literally no alcohol in the house right now. What a bummer.
How do you get through your day?
It's like, it's like Buddy Hackett is a hilarious comedian I watched when I was a kid, and he has a routine. This will contain swear words, so please brace yourself. But he talks about swearing because he swears a lot. But he says, if you drop an anvil on your foot, somebody's going to say the word fuck. You may not say it, but at some point,
somebody's going to say it.
And the nurse is going to go like, looks like he broke his fucking foot.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
well, the only reason I bring that up, and the only reason I bring that up is because some readers are not going to like your book. So if you want to have cursing in it, then put cursing in it, and don't feel bad about people knocking your book down because it had a swear word in it, because Andy Weir's book has 30,000 reviews on Amazon right now. I don't know what the average is because I'm not on that page, but if you want to start your book off with the word fuck in it, go ahead. Like, don't be worried about pissing somebody off, because if you piss somebody off, that book was not for them. Somebody else will find it and somebody else will read it. So that's the only point I wanted to make.
But having said that, if you don't need it, don't use it, because if it doesn't need it, you're probably going to sell more books by just telling the story without quite so much.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Write the story that you intend to write. If you're writing a gritty cop mystery thriller thing, they're gonna cuss. But if you're writing a Miss Marple garden mystery, there's not going to be a lot of profanity in that. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So just pick your genre and be true to it. That's really the bottom line.
Just one of the things I wanted to do is where are we? Yeah. So just out of idle curiosity, even as we were discussing this is how quick this search is done. I went to The Martian, as Josh said, 30,000 reviews. Clicked on 1 star, and I just thought, you know what? A moment later, I'll just have to scroll down a couple of reviews, and I will find this. So, review August 5th, 2014. Immature, foul language, ruined potentially great book. Great story, ruined by the adolescent need for curse words. The book starts out with the word fuck. That's a 1 star review. So.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So whatever. They didn't like it. That doesn't mean there's not 1,000 people that will like it. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. So that's just to sort of like give some evidence, I suppose, to the point that you came across with different stuff.
All right. So
let's go back to beginnings.
Right.
Okay. I'd like to do the show sponsor before we make the next book. Is that okay? Can I do that?
Do they have a beginning to their book?
I was going to take a question in the chat, so do the show sponsor, and then I'll do that.
Okay.
Well, we've got 5 minutes officially till the go sponsor. So.
Whoa, let's all be on time and everything. Like we're always on time.
Josh found his fan opener.
On topic. First time.
On time, on topic, every time. Okay, this week's show sponsor is The Last Aeon by Richard Fox. It's the 5th book in the Terran Armor Corps series. War rages across the galaxy, and humanity is losing battle after battle. The renegade armor Roland seeks the key to victory against the enemy encroaching from all sides. An Aeon guards a secret which will tip the balance of power in the galaxy. But first, Roland and the Ibarra nation must defeat her guardians, the Kurgel, I think. On another front, and amid the tumultuous aftermath of Roland's defection, Gideon leads a desperate attempt to assassinate the Kasat general. He is the last hope to turn the tide of battle and save the world of Oranos. As the war against the Kasat and the merciless allies grind on, Gideon and Roland must summon faith and fury to survive. Don't miss the next action-packed military science fiction adventure in the Terran Armor Corps series. That's The Last Aeon by Richard Fox. I'm very disappointed that I couldn't go, okay, I'm going to do it. Gideon and Roland must summon faith and fury to survive. Got to find them.
Can I just also say that is probably one of the best blurbs I've ever heard.
He's getting he does a really good job.
Are nice.
Richard does.
That's great.
Yeah,
she
does.
On a side note, his survey said that his book was a large part of the buying decision in his readers.
That's right.
We talked about that on another episode.
So Richard, you remember that, Richard? Just remember what we've said here.
Yes.
I'll tell you after the show.
I've put the link to the book in the live chat. It's also going to be in the show notes as well. Go pick it up. It's a great series. And then after you've done that, go buy Terra Nova by me and Richard, because you'll love that book too.
Fantastic audio.
That was a double sponsor. If you didn't, I hit over 300 ratings on Audible for Terra Nova this week.
That's good.
I have to say, because I consider myself an audiobook what do you call it now? Of course,
junkie,
really
aficionado.
Junkie aficionado.
Ooh, I like that aficionado.
I really into them, and I've listened to a lot. But Terra Nova is a fantastic book, Josh. So you can go ahead and blush or whatever you do.
Thank you.
But it comes the writing and the narrating, of course, with Luke. I mean, I've really enjoyed it. So, which has a great beginning, by the way. Maybe we'll talk about that.
Indeed.
So, Bard of today wanted to know, in a prologue in Epic Fantasy, would a grab within a page and a half? I am going to cite one of my favorite Epic Fantasy openings, and it is probably the classic Epic Fantasy opening. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. Now,
that's a good beginning. I forgot.
That's the first paragraph of The Hobbit, which pretty much started the epic fantasy genre. And it immediately pulls you in and makes you think, well, what is a hobbit? Why does he live in a hole? You know, and you immediately kind of want to know more about these creatures. And he doesn't really get to the story for another, I don't know, in this particular edition, it's 7 or 8 pages. So to answer Bard's question, no, epic fantasy readers, they want that deep immersion into a fantasy world. They want to understand the setting and the cultures in that setting well enough that they feel like they're part of it. You still need something happening to keep them engaged. But for epic fantasy readers, I truly believe it's about losing themselves in this completely alien and magical world that you've created. So you can take a little bit more with openings and those set in that genre. I firmly believe, and that's still one of my favorite openings of all time.
I read in one book on writing, and I think that it said, and maybe the hook is different than the setup. They're kind of related. But I thought that it's this one book I read recently, and I don't want to quote it because I don't want to misquote, but it had said that basically anywhere in the first 25% of the book can be the opening.
Well, I think that's kind of the inciting incident.
The inciting incident, yeah. But the point is that you don't have to have, like another book I read on writing talked about, this writer had gone to these conferences. You got to have all this, we got to start with something happening. And so they wrote this big car chase as the first scene, but it was like a romantic comedy and it had no business being in there. And they're like,
right.
Well, they told me I needed to have something. Well, it doesn't have to be a gun battle, but it needs to catch your attention. So,
right.
Some of those ones you guys just read, they are very punchy and engaging without being an explosion. It doesn't have to be an explosion. It doesn't have to be a sword battle or in the case of fantasy, or a dragon swooping down, but it needs to set the tone, and it needs to somehow tell you there is something at stake in this book, and you must read on to find out what that is. And whether or not everybody dies, and what a holiday.
It could be something as simple as cutting yourself shaving, or spilling a cup of coffee on yourself in a street side French cafe where you accidentally bump into the love of your life and you meet her later on in the book. I mean, it does. You're right. It doesn't have to be some like life and death situation.
Yeah.
Well, so interesting. Just to sort of like harken back to the. I know we've done it, but I just want to sort of like give like a little bit of a different context, if you like, to the Martian's opening. Like we know what the Martian's about, because it's such a popular book. But let's pretend you don't know what the Martian's about. I'm pretty much fucked. That's my considered opinion. But 6 days into what should have been the greatest 2 months of my life, and it's turned into a nightmare. That is an absolutely universal opening, isn't it? That's like what you're.
No, it is powerful for sure.
Yeah, that doesn't have to be science fiction. That can be a romance opening. That can be, I've screwed up my best relationship. It can be a Game of Thrones opening. I'm in a dungeon somewhere. I'm fucked. I'm pretty much fucked. That's my consideration. Right. It can be a thriller. Yeah, it can be a thriller. It can be a cop who's screwed up. It can be any opening. Immediately, that is a universal opening. We've all been in that situation where we fucked up, and that is such an immediate buy-in to that character.
That's a really good take, Raph. I didn't consider that.
And genuinely, that's not something I've even considered until what you just said there, Chuck. And that's probably an inadvertent power of that opening. I'm not. Andy Weir's a lovely guy. Did he consider that was so universal?
You have to wonder how intentional. It's because a lot of the best. You assume that people write these great openings intentionally, and they probably do, and they probably have editors that help them. But I wonder how many people it just kind of fell in their lap. I don't know.
So, I gotta be honest with you. As I've said numerous times on this show, and I'm sure people are sick of hearing it, I've been writing for a long time, and I can honestly say my best work has always come when I wasn't thinking about it. When I was just I was in the groove, and the words were just flowing, and I really wasn't 100% sure of what I was getting down until after I went back and read it later. So I think there's that delicate balance of intent and passion that you kind of have to hit.
Right.
When you can get that spot, man, that's when you're golden. It doesn't matter what you're doing. That's when you're golden.
I want to hit one more great opening before we talk about maybe some mediocre ones, and then maybe some openings that weren't spellbinding at all, but then the book that followed was awesome. So this is going to take me a minute, but I'm going to do this for two reasons. One, the book that I'm talking about now is The Gunslinger.
Oh, one of my favorites, man. One of my favorites.
So, also, spoiler alert, because I'm going to ruin the whole series for people that haven't read the book, but I'm doing it on purpose. So if you don't want The Gunslinger, the series spoiled for you, just fast forward like 5 minutes. So I'm going to read the first line, and then I'm going to read a little bit of the book, and then I'm going to show you why this book is one of the best openings of all time. Okay. The Gunslinger. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. The desert was the apotheosis of all deserts, huge, standing to the sky for what looked like eternity in all directions. It was white and blinding and waterless and without features save for the faint, cloudy haze of the mountains which sketched themselves on the horizon, and the devil grass which brought sweet dreams, nightmares, death. An occasional tombstone sign. Uh-oh. I don't know what I did.
It's the epicness of that opening, dude.
Yeah.
It's causing this stuff to short
An
circuit.
occasional tombstone sign pointed the way for once the drifted track that cut its way through the thick crust of alkali had been a highway. Coaches and bacas had followed it. The world had moved on since then. The world had emptied. The gunslinger had been struck by a momentary dizziness, a kind of yawning sensation that made the entire world seem ethereal, almost a thing that could be looked through. It passed, and like the world upon whose hide he walked, he moved on. So the first time I read this, I was like, that's really cool. The first line, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. What a phenomenal line. Like, that's very cool. And then as you read through, you're like, yeah, I'm getting the scenery. I'm getting the vividry. This is really neat, right? And I'm sure everybody else that has read The Gunslinger agrees with me. But then when you read that second paragraph, the momentary dizziness, the ethereal feeling that he has, after you finish the series. See, I went back after I read the
7 900-page books.
After you've read all 7 books and you finish the 7th book, go back and read the beginning of the first book, and it will give you goosebumps.
Changes everything. You're so right.
Everything. Yep. Because what happens is this journey of Roland chasing the man in black, going to the Dark Tower, and once he gets to the Dark Tower, that's when he's going to save the world. That's when he's going to save all of the worlds. But at the end of the 7th book, and Stephen King is genius here, because when he ends the 7th book, he tells readers, stop reading here. This is a happy ending. You don't want to read the rest.
This is as happy as it gets.
This is as happy as it gets. If you don't like happy endings, continue to read. So when you go on and you read the actual ending of the book, Roland gets to the tower. He gets to the tower and he challenges the tower, and he goes into the tower and he goes to the very top level of the tower and he opens a door. And he steps through that door, and as his foot crosses the threshold, he has a very, like, this brief, oh no, feeling like this is going to happen again, and he steps onto the desert.
But he has the horn.
He has the horn the second time, but it's a complete circle, and that was basically the entire theme of the book, of the series. And so the beginning of The Gunslinger, while it does pull you into a 7-book series, and it is an epic beginning to this book that is phenomenal. If you haven't read it, please go read it.
Don't judge it by the movie.
The movie, I don't even want to talk about the movie. The book, the beginning of this book, which was written, this book was written, what, 20, 30 years before the last book was written?
He started writing in the 70s.
I think I was in high school when it came out.
Yeah, it was like 86-ish, I think.
That's the year I graduated high school. So yeah.
First heard it.
So there's a lot of negative stuff in this series. Like you could probably skip the Sonic Susanna. You could probably skip the Wolves of the Kala.
I did like the Army of Dr. Dooms, though. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, that was good. But the way that he ties in the first book and then the last book, and that those first 2 paragraphs are just, I mean, they're phenomenal.
That's just brilliant storytelling, man. I mean, it was just.
Well, and he's a pantser.
I
think it's on writing or one of the things
and honestly, it shows in that series.
It does.
It really does. It really does. But overall, if you take the entire series and put it together and look at what he did, that is just some masterful storytelling, beginning to end. I mean, even the parts where he kind of veers off, ties so much of his other work into it.
The part I didn't like in that series was the beach. They're on the beach for a long time.
The killer lobsters and stuff.
Yeah, I was like, okay.
Dada chim, dada chum.
Dada chim, dada chum. Anyway, so
what's crazy about that book is that there's so many things in that book that you can say, and people are like, "Oh yeah, I get that." And I think Chuck's dogs are going crazy.
Oh, can you hear those? Sorry about that. Yeah,
No,
I think
that's all
my
right.
wife just got home from work.
we like a little. We're dog friendly. We're dog friendly podcast, so we don't care if there's little.
Yeah,
dog,
that's my big
cast.
70-pound American foxhound. He likes to get loud.
So anyway,
Good
those
deal.
are my favorite series. I was going to mention too that I think it was Blake that brought up. I can't go all the way to the beginning, but if it was Blake that brought up Way of Kings, and I can't remember what it was. We were talking about epic fantasy beginnings and then starting with a punch too. The Way of Kings actually is very tricky in that it has basically 3 different beginnings.
Yes.
And it's got the prelude, and then it's got the prologue, and then it has chapter 1. And between the prelude and chapter 1, or between the prelude and the prologue, is 4,500 years. And then between the prologue and the first chapter is 5 years. So but it does it really well. And the entire time you're reading book 1, by the time you're going back and rereading the prelude, because you're like, I think I understand what happened here. I think I get it.
Several times.
Yeah.
I started the book reading it 2 or 3 times, and I started an audiobook 2 or 3 times, and I finally listened to the whole thing. A lot going on.
I tell you,
that puts the E in epic. I mean, that's
well, and I tell you, a lot of people say that about the Way of Time, the Wheel of Time. I stopped reading it, by the way. I got through like half of book 2, and I was like, I'm done. But a lot of people say, and I agree, about the Way of Kings and Stormlight Archives. It's way better the second time. And it's very strange to say that, but there are certain books. Well, it's kind of like Game of Thrones. I've read Game of Thrones like 3 times, and it always gets better.
Yeah.
And who wrote that, Josh? That Way of Kings book?
And I'm not saying it. I'm not saying it. You're tricking me. That's a trick, and I ain't doing it. Didn't we used to have a sign, Scott? I used to have. We used to have
a Brandon Sanderson fan club sign, and I think it probably used to be a drinking game for people. Whenever Josh said Brandon Sanderson, then people had to drink, but then we had liability issues, and we had to axe that whole thing.
It was bad.
It's the way Josh's voice went slightly high pitched.
Yeah, start touching himself off camera, and then we're done.
It's almost It's almost about the Peter Hamilton interview you did, wasn't it? It was like, Josh.
Yeah.
Hi, Peter. How are you doing? I love you, Peter.
Dude,
awesome. It's true. That's a true story, though. I can't deny that. It's a true story.
All right. So, who can remember a less than epic opening to a book?
I can. The reason why I want to bring forth the one I've got is because it is possibly it's Dan Simmons' Hyperion Cantos, and firstly, I will say that this is one of my favourite series. So it's kind of a positive negative, if you get my meaning. So it took me 3 goes to get through this first paragraph. And then once I managed it, I found one of the most beautifully well-crafted, amazing stories that I've ever read. So for those who don't know, Dan Simmons' Hyperion Cantos, 4 books: Hyperion, Rise of Hyperion, Endymion, Hyperion, Fall of Hyperion, Endymion, Rise of Endymion. And they are amazing books, and I would urge anyone to read them. However, you've kind of got to steel yourself for a kind of clunky.
Really, like the first whole chapter or 2.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a really slow burn.
Yeah. So I've got it up here. Prologue. The hegemony consul sat on the balcony of his ebony spaceship and played Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor on an ancient but well-maintained skyway, while great green saurian thing surged and bellowed in the swamp's below. A thunderstorm was brewing in the north. Grooved black clouds silhouetted a forest of giant gymnosperms, while stratocumulus towered 9 kilometers high in the violet sky. lightning rippled along the horizon, close to the ship, occasionally vague. Reptilian shapes would blunder into the interdiction field, cry out, and then crash away through the indigo mist. The console concentrated on a difficult section of the prelude and ignored the approach of the storm and nightfall. There's a lot of information that's communicated there in terms of like our console. You get a lot of information about him, the fact that he's determined to crack on through playing his musical piece. I don't really know who he is, and I don't know why I should care about that right there and then.
It's very difficult to read.
Well, you know, listening to you read it, I think that that opening really just suffers from a lack of editing. Do we really need to know that the cumulus clouds were 9 kilometers tall? You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of information there that I really think is kind of extraneous. And if it could be tightened up, you might think, okay, why is this guy so intent on playing his piano? Who is this guy? What's going on?
I mean, could it be a little sleight of hand where they're trying to get us not to really pay attention? So,
I don't know. I mean,
and that won a Hugo Award, correct?
It won all kinds of
awards. It won a bunch of awards.
I mean, it won a lot of stuff. I would imagine a Hugo wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility.
I'm pretty sure that's why I read it the first time, because it had a big shiny badge of some big award it won. And I like
genuinely, it's one of the most. It's one of the most beautifully written stories as well.
Not easy to read though.
Once you get down to the nitty gritty of it, it's not. It's a dense book. You know.
Well, I mean, it's essentially a scientific version a science fiction version of Canterbury Tales. I mean, it's all these different storylines. Well, the first one. So you know, it's kind of, and I love the one about the girl aging backwards and all that stuff. I mean, it was just a great. But you're right, the opening is kind of a slog.
And I kicked myself. So, like, probably between reading that first paragraph and then getting around to reading the whole story, it's a space of a year. And in that time, I kicked myself. My big message from this is that openings are really important, but don't let them be a barrier. If someone recommends a good story to you, and you think that opening is a bit dicey, don't let it be a barrier for you.
Well,
because you know what? Because what lies behind that might be amazing.
If you were young,
it basically comes back to the whole: you only get one chance to make a first impression. If your opening is shitty and boring and people just don't care, then they're not going to stick with the book. I mean, because reading a book can be a big time investment. So you've got to make it punchy. You've got to make it interesting. You've got to make it intriguing, understandable. I mean, you want people to say, okay, I want to find out what the hell is going on right here, you know. But if you drag it out too far in a genre that doesn't expect a longer opening, you know, you're going to lose readers. So for epic science fiction, you can have the longer opening, but I still think that you're correct. Hyperion, it does even for epic sci-fi. That was a.
I think he's trying too hard.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it.
You can try too hard. Sometimes you try too hard. You know, try to show all your chops in the first.
And I'd like to spend a minute or so just dissecting this opening paragraph, just to say that actually, once you dive into it, it's probably not too bad. It is bad, but it's not too bad if you get my meaning. So the balcony of an ebony spaceship, that tells me that, you know, the spaceships there are you know, they've gone beyond merely functional. You know, there's a bit of form to them as opposed to functional. So the council sat on the balcony of his ebony spaceship. Spaceships can have balconies. He played Rachmaninoff Prelude C# in minor. Now, someone who knows what Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C# minor will immediately get a soundtrack for that. I don't know what Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C# minor actually sounds like. So, you know, I'm probably like a little bit kind of stuffed there. But to those who do know it, they can probably get a hell of a lot out of that on an ancient but well-maintained Steinway. Green saurian things surged and bellowed in the swamps below. Yeah, maybe that tells you it's sort of like the overlooking a kind of jungly kind of situation. A thunderstorm was brewing in the north. This was the one that I thought was really clunky as hell and almost unforgivable. And I think this is where I ground to a halt. Bruised black clouds silhouetted a forest of giant gymnosperms. What the hell is one of them? That's not pretty dead. That's a little bit dead.
I don't know what that is, but I'd like for you to say it again if you don't mind.
I am not Scott. While stratocumulus clouds towered 9 kilometers, why is 9 particularly relevant there? I don't think the Hyperion is massively self-referential. There's very little in the book which doesn't matter, and that's why it's such a dense book. You get so much out of it, but I don't recall 9 kilometers being particularly crucial. You could like make that more punchy by saying, a forest of oak trees.
Well, even if you just drop the 9, kilometers. Let somebody fill in the number of kilometers.
Even something like stratocumulus clouds towered high into the violet sky. It just seems more. Yeah, that's more evocative, isn't it?
Well, it just kind of.
And I genuinely don't want to slam because I would urge anyone who if they're going to have one takeaway from this
awesome book.
from this video, would read Hyperion because it's brilliant.
It's a brilliant piece of writing. It really is.
So here's my thought. Here's my thought on this: is that Hyperion, for anybody that's thinking about reading the Hyperion Cantos, and it's 4 books. They are like genuine space opera in the actual sense of the word.
Yeah, exactly.
If epic fantasy was science fiction, it would be Hyperion. Hyperion is the epic fantasy of science fiction space opera. You could put up Dan Simmons and Peter F. Hamilton, Pandora's Star and Hyperion. You're going to have the biggest books in science fiction, right? And so when you look at this paragraph, this opening to Hyperion, which is a great book, and even the structure and the function of the first book, which is unlike the follow-on books because it's the 4 separate stories of the people that are on their journey. When you read that first paragraph, you nailed it, Ralph, when you said it's very clunky and everything in the book matters. So why do we care about all these little details on this first paragraph on this page? Because basically they're in a tree ship, right? If I remember correctly, it's basically a magical, for the lack of a better word, a magical tree that is traveling super speeds through space. Like that's basically what it is. That's how I picture it in my head. And so all this other stuff really is kind of superfluous to the book. And if you can get past it, the rest of the book is great. But I think you're right. You could have probably cut down a lot of that colorful, poetic language that he used and I don't know that he was trying too hard because I mean, it was written back in the day, and colorful language was one of the things.
Yeah,
that's there's a concept called Chekhov's gun in writing, and that is. And forgive me if I'm
absolutely right. No, you're absolutely
right. You put a gun on the mantle in the first act; it has to go off by the third act.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So even in that first paragraph, he's put a hell of a lot of Chekhov's guns.
Right.
So. Yeah,
and you know that weighs you down.
Yeah,
because you know that. Yeah, remember all that.
Is that something at this point? Is the fact that the clouds are 9 kilometers tall important? We don't know. Are the vague rectilinear? Your brain gets overloaded with these, and maybe there's some value in making your Chekhov's guns matter.
Yeah, I have one other thought to go with that, and I think you have to look at when this science fiction was published. And we live in a different era of science fiction now, but science fiction, I think at that time had an inferiority complex. And and I think that he was probably, because this was the first book I ever read where I remember seeing it kind of pushed as a literary science fiction. And so I think when I said trying too hard, I think that people were trying to get over that. Well, I write pulpy science fiction books, and people had that self-esteem issue, and they thought that was a bad thing. And he was trying to write a beautiful, poetic, literary, heavy, dense, real writing, not some, pew pew book. But that's just a theory. Somebody else is smarter.
But the time when it does come down into pew,
I think that's
brilliant. That's when he has those.
I think that's legit, Scott, because I just looked it up, and Hyperion, the first one, came out in '89.
Right.
There was still very much a stigma about science.
There was no science fiction movies. There was like one or two. You had like Star Wars.
Pretty much you had Aliens and Star Wars, and then a bunch of B stuff. And then you had maybe the original Star Trek in '89.
Yeah.
Hey, The Last Starfighter came out in '84.
Oh, Last Starfighter. Sorry, forgot about that one.
Josh, can we move away from your lifelong fantasy?
Also,
you have been recruited by the Star League to defend Xur against the whatever. I don't know.
And don't discount Enemy Mine. That was a good one.
No, we don't even talk about that movie.
I like that one. Fuck anybody that did.
My point is that compared to nowadays, it was totally different.
No, I think you're right, Scott.
Your selection, because now you can go out and get on Netflix and literally find 100 science fiction movies.
Yeah.
You're lucky to find 10 in 10 years back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
It wasn't cool to be a geek in '89.
No.
Is it cool to be a geek now?
Oh yeah.
We're running the fucking world, so it better be.
So that was the Hyperion is a beginning, a mediocre beginning to a fantastic book. Again, I encourage anyone to go read it and the other books that we've talked about. Here, before we sign off, can any of you guys think of a good beginning to a bad book, or just a bad beginning in general?
I can't go that far, but I was going to talk about Snow Crash. I think Snow Crash defined cyberpunk, and so it's a huge milestone book. You'll think of when it was written and the things that are in Snow Crash it's like 20 or 30 years before Ready Player One, and it's basically that story.
Yeah, but if you go back to the William Gibson stuff like Neuromancer and Burning Chrome, I think William Gibson pretty much defined.
Okay, so I'll withdraw that comment and move on. But the point is about Snow Crash is I think it has a really great beginning, but the second half of the book I was just like blah 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 blah.
I read that in reviews. I did. Okay, so real quick, I think each one of us pick out your favorite opening line from one of your own works and blurt it out.
Oh man.
Just real fast. I know we're coming up on time.
Chuck, you go first.
Mine is from my Paragons trilogy, and it's from the first book in that trilogy, and it's one sentence, no paragraph, just one sentence. Israel Trent woke to shadows.
That's interesting because a lot of people say don't start a book when you're waking up. So
I'm not most people. So.
No. I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying, like, what was your thinking when you started that?
Because when the next paragraph starts describing what he woke up to was basically he has no memory of how he got there. He's in an underground dungeon. He has an IV in his arm. He's dressed in scrubs, and he's on a gurney in a room with a bunch of other scrubs that have no people in them, and there's nothing but emergency lighting around him.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely puts you in there. Got to get the question. What?
So the starting line for one of my books is actually the first book that the first full novella that I ever published, and that's Breaking Through, the first book in my Second Star series. And the first paragraph or the first couple of lines is this: an alert icon flashed in Lieutenant John McNeil's optic as his friend heaved for the third time.
I remember that.
John wondered exactly how many times the human body could throw up before it turned inside out. And as Mark Keene's body slumped it down again, John decided he was glad he hadn't had the chicken.
Yeah, dude, I laughed. I laughed for 10 minutes after I read that. That was great. That was when I first started talking to you. I read that book and I was like, all right, this guy's cool.
Ralph, got any?
What about you, Ralph? You got anyone?
Yeah, so I think the one I liked was Expedition. So the second one in my trilogy. And you know what? I'm going to cheat. I'm going to cheat here. So I've got a prologue and then I've got a chapter 1. So in the prologue, it starts off with the beautiful comet Perseus loomed low over the twilight horizon, casting a faint illumination over the verdant grasslands of Yellowstone Park. The single bright star of the nucleus sprouted 2 misty blue trails, spreading an eerie V of gas across the heavens. So that's the opening paragraph of the prologue. But then we move to chapter 1, and chapter 1, I'm just going to keep it really simple with the first line. The crosshairs settled on the distant figure. And
well, that's great just by itself, man.
Yeah, I just wanted that kind of dichotomy between, you've got something epic happening in the heavens, and then you've got something really kind of coarse, really kind of, but absolutely focused in on a single person.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of dichotomy.
Yeah, I like that, man. It's awesome.
So yeah, that's mine anyway.
What about yours, Scott? Is it one you haven't written yet?
Yeah, probably the one I haven't found yet. I have the one I was going to use. I kind of felt convoluted, so I get that. But also, this is from Dragon Badge. The first line is Michael Prim spent his time watching for signs, quick transactions on street corners, girls walking nowhere, and people who didn't belong in the Downs except to give girls rides to an alley.
Yeah, I see nothing wrong with that. That's really good.
I like that whole first scene and stuff. It's a book
I remember in Dragon Badge sort of really getting the
it's pretty
getting a kind of an almost. I know it wasn't set in a dystopian world, but I almost sort of like it almost felt like a dystopian world. You can imagine some guy in his police cruiser, like neon lights, sort of looking around. If it's a movie and sort of like tracking left and right, and he's seeing
hopefully I've learned a lot. There's a lot of good scenes in that book that I like, but I think I'd like to think that I've improved my overall writing craft, but who knows. But anyway, I like that. I like that opening. Openings are important.
Very good. Everybody that's watching the show live, thank you guys for coming and hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. Hopefully these roundtable sessions that we're having are educational and entertaining and informative, because that's what we're going for here mostly. Other than that, we're just kind of just making fun of each other and drinking alcoholic beverages and talking about the stuff that we like doing. So thanks for coming and hanging out with us while we're doing that. At least we've got a couple more weeks of us kind of hanging out and talking. Then we've got some really cool guests scheduled. Let us know what your favorite beginnings are in the comments below this video or in our Facebook group. We always love talking with viewers of the show. We consider everybody an equal here. So come and hang out with us on YouTube and Facebook and let us know what you think about the show. If you don't let us know that we're awesome, then we might not keep doing it. I'm just kidding. We're going to keep doing it whether you think we're cool or not.
Which is a good thing.
I don't think there's any danger of it.
And then it was about
you're cool in your pink shirt.
Right. And again, apologies for last week. I'm not sure what happened with the connection last week. Hopefully it was fine this week, and it will continue to be so. Otherwise, I'll have to drop some cash and we'll do some other avenues of approach.
Change. It's not change.
That's right. That's right. We're getting a lot of good submissions for our anthology. So if you
I think we're up to like 6 of them now.
We are still accepting. So definitely, if you've got an idea for an epic or high fantasy story that you'd like to submit, ksmanthology@gmail.com. You can check out our Facebook group pinned post. Say that 5 times real fast for information on the anthology. And please submit your best work, and we will love to read it. Okay, that's it. That's my pitch. You guys have anything else?
I'm good.
Lots of
if you think of anything you'd like us to do on Facebook Live or anything like that, if you wanted us to do like weekly Q&As or something, just
we
shout
talk about
out
soggy noodles next week, or we could talk about endings.
Ooh, soggy noodles.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Soggy middles. Yes.
Soggy middles.
Middles, or soggy noodle middles. Noodle middles. Noodles. Next week we're talking about noodles in the middle, whatever that means.
Indeed.
Here's a thought though. What about
Wow, that could go bad fast.
It could. I'm pretty sure it already did.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say, Ralph?
No, I was going to say, what about endings?
Yeah, we should.
Oh, absolutely.
Endings are
We
very
should definitely
important.
do endings.
Yeah, that could be a definite topic.
I like to just trail off randomly.
We'll talk about Stephen King a lot if we talk about endings, because
That's right.
That's where he drops the ball.
Oh, that's when you have really good endings and really like. Okay. All right. So maybe we'll do that next Monday. Let's do that. Let's put that on the schedule for next Monday.
Sure.
We'll talk about
Endings.
good endings, mediocre endings. I'll start a post in the group. You guys can share what books you think are phenomenal endings or bad endings or whatnot, and
then you
we'll
can
go
say,
from there.
Dun, dun, when you
Dun,
say
dun,
dun,
And I think we should also do more readings where we each read like something and break down like a paragraph or something of the.
But only if I can go of the doom or some similar
Only if you can do
mystery.
that. Only if you can do that for sure.
No, Josh, I want Chuck to do it.
You want what?
Look,
So,
hey,
yeah, I think your voice is the richest and deepest and sexiest out of them all. So, yeah.
Hey, first of all, when you
That's
were
true.
reading The Hobbit, I was like, oh, I can so be in the fire. Like, we're sitting in a fireplace, Dad's sitting in a chair reading a book with his legs crossed. He's got a robe and a pipe. Chuck was reading The Hobbit, and I was
Josh,
so there.
I'm
Josh,
really
if
more
you're
of a
about-
cigar guy, but I see what you're saying. All right. I would be happy to read. I'll do the ad read for you next week, Josh. And I'll
Yeah,
put
you
some-
do the ad read
I'll
next
put
week.
some oomph into it for you.
We need a fireplace.
What I really want is Chuck's 15 minutes or something where you've got a fireplace that you built specifically for it.
Just have it
You've got-
behind me.
You've got a pipe, and the fireplace. is
Welcome to
crackling in
Papa
the background.
Chuck's story time.
Oh, Papa Chuck, I like that a lot. Papa Chuck.
I would sit cross-legged before you.
Honestly,
Pipe.
okay, I know we're getting crazy here, but I
This
just
is
gotta
really
say,
gone off the
I'm
rails.
part of a literary group here in town called Out Loud Huntsville, and there's this place in my city called Low Mill, and basically it's just a big art center. And one year we did a stage play where people would get up and like read poetry or tell stories or whatever, and I actually did Papa Chuck's story time. And I wrote a Southern, not really scary, but kind of a Southern fable. And I put on this whole outfit like an old timey guy. And I came outside. I came out
like
on
what
stage.
you're wearing right now.
Fuck you. And I came out on stage
Language.
and I sat down in this chair and I said, gather around. And all these kids come running up from the audience and got on the stage and sat down around me.
And you went,
and
oh
I-
God, this story.
And I recited this story that I had written that sounded like this old country fable. So Papa Chuck's story time is a real thing. That's the
awesome.
whole point of me
All
telling
right,
you
so
that.
I'm going to combine two
okay.
great ideas here. I'm going to combine Papa Chuck's story time and an idea that Bard of Today just brought up that a couple people thought were interesting is would you guys read a critique, a section of my work? And so
I absolutely
maybe
will do that for you, man.
well,
Absolutely.
maybe
I like
what we should do is do a live reading of a person's work, and then we can critique it live. Now, well, honestly, we're going to do it honestly, like we did at Nathan's. Like we did at Nathan's book. We did Nathan's book, and we were completely honest about Nathan's book, and we haven't done another one. So, if you're interested in that, Bard, we will definitely do that. Maybe we can pick a show time and do that, and you submit like the first page of your work, and we could critique it and, you know, give our thoughts. We are not experts. We'll have to put like a little sign, like a little what is that called? Help me out. Disclaimer. About we are not experts and we can't guarantee the safety of your cat during this reading. But definitely
spontaneously combust.
Yeah, your cat might catch on fire if we do this. So
your feelings are in danger at this point.
That's right. Oh, and we can have Ellen guest star. That'd be good.
No.
That's disgusting.
I don't know, man. I love Ellen, but
I love Ellen too. But you can't. Ellen is a pro level for that sort of thing. You got to be prepared. You got to do some.
Are you saying we're not pro level?
I think me and Ellen
have you ever watched those like kung fu movies where you've got like the grandmaster,
right?
Who just does that sharp, like kind of reaches into someone's chest, rips out the heart, and
right. You can't be like, wait a minute,
hold on, here, hold this.
No. Hold on. Are you comparing Ellen Campbell to the dude in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom who's like, and he fucking grabs the heart and brings it out, and the guy's in the cage like, oh, and then they drop him into the lava? Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much.
Ellen, is that you?
But metaphorically, that person will become
metaphorically. Yeah, okay, I see that. I see what I see where you're going.
He's plunging into the lava.
We could, or maybe better yet, maybe we could do a show where we bring a bunch of editors or other people on as guests, and they can do some reviewing as well.
I'm good with that.
All kinds of things.
Yeah, editor.
That strikes me as
Alan says
we won't be the bad guys.
Ellen says she's not that tall.
Yeah, that's true. She's super short. So no, let's do that. Bard, if you're on Facebook or if you're in the Facebook group, send me a private message and we'll get you hooked up, man. We'll figure out. We'll figure out how we can get you on, man.
So I guess we're about 10 minutes over, so I guess we need to go ahead.
Thank God.
Actually, I was going to say, I guess we should go ahead and wrap it up, but I can't end the cast. So
no, we can't.
That's all Josh.
Sorry about that. I had a little 4-year-old emergency. She sat on her finger. I'm not really sure what happened. So yes, if you're on Facebook, hit us up. We'll get you a slot, and we'll rip apart your stuff and see what we can do with it. So everybody in the live chat, thank you guys for hanging out with us. Come back next time. We're going to talk about some writing. We're going to talk about some reading, and of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. You guys have a fantastic Monday.
Bye, guys.
See you. Oh, get a phone call.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect.